In August of 1968, a construction crew was working late shifts on the expansion of Route 14 near a stretch of undeveloped land in rural Washington state. The area was known for its dense, foreboding woods. It wasn't uncommon for workers to come across old tools or remnants of long-abandoned homesteads while digging, but what they unearthed this time was different. Buried in a layer of compacted earth was a small, jagged stone with intricate carvings. Official reports dismissed it as an artifact of no particular significance, but those who handled it swore they felt something, a coldness, an energy, a weight beyond its size. Soon after, the crew began reporting strange occurrences, equipment malfunctions, whispered voices in the dead of night, and worse. What they'd unearthed wasn't just a relic. It was something that should have stayed buried. This story comes with a little announcement I'm thrilled to share. I've just launched grimwhispers.com. Along with it, my new audiobook, Grim Legends, Horror on American Soil. Dive into the chilling tales of America's most haunted places, packed with fascinating history and first-hand accounts that'll give you goosebumps. After this story, head over to grimwhispers.com. The link is in the description. Alright, let's get back to the story. It started with my friend Kelly. She'd been one of those people who could never leave a mystery alone. Kelly was always poking into things, old attics, forgotten trails, the dark corners of antique shops. She called it exploring, but sometimes it felt like she was looking for something. I wasn't with her when she found the fragment. She'd gone on one of her little excursions to a flea market just outside town. When she showed it to me, I remember thinking it looked like nothing special. It was about the size of her hand, jagged at the edges, and covered in strange, uneven carvings that didn't form any language I'd ever seen. It was heavy for its size, like it was made of something denser than stone. "Cool, right?" she said, holding it up to the sunlight. The guy who sold it to me said it was from the 1800s, a relic from one of the old homesteads around here. "Looks creepy," I said. "Why would you even want that?" Kelly grinned. "It's just a rock with some scratches on it. Don't be dramatic." But even as she brushed it off, I saw the way her fingers lingered on the carvings, tracing them like she was trying to figure out their meaning. At first nothing happened, or at least nothing that seemed connected. Kelly brought the fragment home and set it on a shelf in her living room, like it was just another piece of her ever-growing collection of oddities. A week later, she called me, laughing about how her car radio had started acting up. "Every time I turn it on, it's just static," she said. "But not like regular static, it's weird, like it's trying to say something." "What do you mean by trying to say something?" "I don't know," she said. "It's probably just interference or something. Anyway, it's no big deal." But it didn't stop there. Kelly started having headaches. Not the kind that come and go after a bad day, but the kind that linger, gnawing at the edges of your skull until you can't think straight. She said it felt like something was drilling into her brain, like a low hum just below her hearing range that never let up. I told her to go see a doctor, but she waved me off. "It's probably just stress," she said. "Work's been a nightmare lately." Then came the nightmares. She called me in the middle of the night, her voice shaking. "I saw something," she said, "in my dream, or I don't know, maybe it wasn't a dream. It felt real. It was, I don't know how to describe it, like a shape, but it wasn't solid. It was moving, but it didn't have legs or arms. It was just there, watching me. I didn't know what to say. Kelly wasn't the kind of person who got spooked easily. She laughed at horror movies and told ghost stories like they were bedtime tales. But that night, she sounded scared in a way I'd never heard before. Things escalated quickly after that. Kelly stopped answering my calls, and when I went to check on her, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale and damp like she'd been sweating through her clothes. "It's the fragment," she whispered when I confronted her. "I think it's doing this to me." I didn't want to believe her. I told myself it was just stress, just her overactive imagination. But then she showed me her hands. The carvings from the fragment were on her skin, not etched, not tattooed, just there, faint and shimmering, like they'd been burned into her flesh. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice trembling. I woke up, and they were there. I should have left right then and there. I should have grabbed that fragment and thrown it into the lake. But instead, I stayed. Because that's what you do when someone you care about needs help, even if you don't understand what's happening. The night it all came to a head, I was at Kelly's house. She'd begged me to stay, said she couldn't be alone anymore. The air inside felt thick, oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. The fragment was still on the shelf, but it looked different. The carvings seemed deeper, more intricate, like they'd grown on their own. Around midnight, Kelly started screaming. She was in the kitchen, clutching her head, her eyes wide and unfocused. "It's here," she said. "It's here, and it wants me." Before I could reach her, the lights went out. The darkness was complete, like someone had dropped a thick, black curtain over the world. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound like a growl mixed with static was coming from the living room. I didn't want to go, but Kelly was still screaming, and I couldn't just leave her. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way toward the sound. The fragment was glowing, not brightly, but enough to cast faint, shifting shadows across the walls. The air around it shimmered, like heat waves rising off pavement. And then I saw it. A shape, just like Kelly had described. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't quite transparent either. It moved like smoke, coiling and twisting, but it had weight to it, like you could feel its presence pressing down on you. It turned toward me, or at least I think it did. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in any language I knew, but I understood it all the same. It was ancient, older than the woods, older than the earth itself. It had been bound to the fragment, trapped there for centuries, and now it wanted out. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air around me felt alive, like it was pulsing in sync with the glowing fragment. The shape. It wasn't just looking at me. It was reaching out, not physically, but in some other way deeper, like it was touching the edges of my thoughts. Kelly's screaming snapped me back. I turned, stumbling toward the kitchen, and found her on the floor. She wasn't clutching her head anymore. She was staring straight ahead, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide and glassy. "Kelly?" I shook her shoulder, but she didn't respond. Her lips moved faintly, like she was whispering, but no sound came out. Behind me, the growling static noise grew louder. I didn't have to look to know the shape was moving closer. And then I heard it again. Not a voice, not exactly, but the same ancient meaning threading itself into my mind. Leave her, and it will spare you. I understood what it wanted. It wasn't here for me, it was here for her. Kelly had brought the fragment into her home. She had held it, studied it, obsessed over it. She had woken it. But I couldn't just leave her. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "What are you?" It didn't answer, not in words. Instead, the glow from the fragment intensified, flooding the room with a harsh, flickering light. And in that light, I saw things, images, memories maybe, but not mine. I saw the construction site where the fragment had been unearthed. I saw the workers, their faces grim and pale as they stood around a deep, jagged pit. I saw something in that pit, something massive and coiled and writhing, and then I saw blood, so much blood. When the light dimmed, the shape was gone. The fragment sat on the shelf, dark and cold, as if nothing had happened. But Kelly was still lying on the floor, motionless. I don't remember how I got her to the hospital. Everything after that is a blur. I told the doctors she'd had a seizure. It was the only thing that made sense. She woke up the next morning, but she wasn't the same. She didn't remember anything. Not the fragment, not the shape, not even me finding her on the floor. But her hands still had the carvings. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked when I showed her. She tried scrubbing them off, but they didn't budge. That's when I knew I couldn't leave it alone. I had to get rid of the fragment, destroy it, if that was even possible. I went back to her house later that day. The air felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. The fragment was still on the shelf, exactly where it had been. I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I circled it, trying to work up the nerve. It felt like it was watching me, even though it wasn't moving. Finally, I grabbed it. The instant my fingers touched the surface, a shock ran through my arm, sharp and cold. The carvings seemed to pulse under my fingertips, like a faint heartbeat. I wrapped it in a towel and shoved it into my backpack. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't staying here. The locals had their fair share of superstitions about the woods. Stories of strange lights, missing hikers, voices that called out in the dark. If there was ever a place to get rid of something like this, it was there. It was late afternoon by the time I reached the edge of the forest. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the trail. I walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper, until the trees grew so dense they blocked out the light. The further I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. When I finally stopped, I was standing in a small clearing. The air here felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on my chest. I pulled the fragment out of my bag and set it on the ground. It looked almost harmless in the dim light, just a piece of stone with some weird carvings. But I knew better. I grabbed a rock and raised it above my head, ready to smash the fragment into dust. But before I could bring it down, the air around me shifted. It wasn't wind. It was something else, something colder. And then I heard it again. "Release me." I froze. The rock still clutched in my hand. "No," I said aloud, though my voice barely sounded like my own. "I'm ending this." But the fragment pulsed, and the voice grew louder. "You cannot destroy me. I am bound, but not by you." The trees around me seemed to shudder, their branches creaking like old bones. Shadows stretched and twisted, moving even though the light hadn't changed. I dropped the rock and stumbled back. The fragment was glowing again, brighter this time, the carvings writhing like living things. And then I saw it, the shape rising from the ground like smoke. It was bigger now, more defined, its edges sharp and angular. It didn't have a face, but I could feel it glaring at me. "You are nothing, a speck of dust. Leave before I take you as well." I should have run. I should have left it there, let the woods swallow it whole. But I couldn't. Not after what it had done to Kelly. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fragment and ran. I don't remember much of what happened after that. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, the trees blending into one another until I couldn't tell where I was. But eventually, I found my way out. I buried the fragment in a shallow hole near the edge of the forest, as far from Kelly's house as I could manage. I don't know if that was enough, if it's still out there waiting for someone else to find it. But Kelly got better after that. The carvings on her hands faded and the headaches stopped. She doesn't remember much of what happened, and I haven't told her the full story. Some nights, though, I dream about the shape. I see it standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting, just to let me know it hasn't forgotten about me.